Now that you have the core TOGAF 10 concepts in your toolkit, you are ready to use governance to turn those concepts into consistent enterprise outcomes. Governance is where enterprise architecture stops being a set of good ideas and becomes a system of decisions, accountability, and guardrails that actually shape delivery. If you do governance poorly, you create bureaucracy and teams avoid you. If you do governance well, you reduce risk, control cost, improve delivery predictability, and still help teams move fast. In this lecture, you will learn how TOGAF 10 frames architecture governance so you can lead it like a business capability, not a committee that blocks progress. Building on why governance matters, you need to confront a common failure pattern. Governance is often treated as a late-stage approval gate. When it appears near the end of delivery, it feels like a surprise audit, and teams experience it as delay and rework. Governance also fails when it focuses on paperwork rather than decisions, or when it reviews everything with the same intensity regardless of risk. Another failure is unclear authority, where reviews happen but nobody knows who can decide, who can approve exceptions, and who owns the consequences. TOGAF 10 helps you avoid these failures by encouraging governance that is decision-centric, risk-based, and designed to enable flow rather than interrupt it. With those failure modes in mind, you need a clear definition you can use with leaders and delivery teams. Architecture governance is the set of structures, policies, decision rights, and assurance mechanisms that ensure architecture direction is followed and that deviations are handled transparently. It is not a single meeting, and it is not a single document. It is a system that answers 4 leadership questions: who decides, what standards apply, how compliance is assured, and how exceptions are approved and tracked. In TOGAF 10, governance exists to align architecture with business strategy and to protect the enterprise from unmanaged complexity. When governance is working, you are not slowing delivery, you are preventing rework, reducing incidents, and improving predictability. Now that you have a definition, you can adopt the mindset that makes governance practical. You treat governance as guardrails that let teams move quickly with confidence rather than speed bumps that force them to stop repeatedly. Guardrails are clear, stable rules and reusable patterns that remove uncertainty, such as approved platform choices, security requirements, integration standards, and operational readiness expectations. When guardrails are strong, teams spend less time debating foundational issues and more time delivering value. Your governance approach should make it easy to do the right thing and harder to do the risky thing. This is how you control risk and cost without creating a culture of approvals. With guardrails in place, you need decision rights because speed comes from clarity about who can decide. Decision rights define which decisions are local to teams and which decisions require enterprise alignment. For example, a product team might decide user interface technology, but enterprise architecture might govern identity and access, data integration patterns, and shared platform standards. When decision rights are unclear, teams either escalate everything and slow down, or they decide independently and create fragmentation. TOGAF 10 supports clear decision structures, so you can align the organization on what is centralized, what is decentralized, and what requires a transparent exception process. Now that decision rights are clear, you can avoid the biggest governance bottleneck by applying risk-based governance. Risk-based governance means you do not review every change equally. You review deeply when the change is high impact, such as handling sensitive data, changing identity systems, introducing new platforms, or altering shared integration layers. You review lightly when the change is low impact and well contained. This approach protects delivery flow because teams do not feel trapped in unnecessary reviews. It also protects the enterprise because high risk decisions get the attention they deserve. Your role as an enterprise architect is to calibrate governance intensity based on risk, not based on habit. With risk-based governance established, you need to understand how standards and principles do most of the heavy lifting. Principles express non-negotiable direction, such as security by design, reuse before buy, and operational readiness as a release requirement. Standards translate principles into concrete expectations, such as approved identity methods, logging requirements, and integration protocols. When standards are missing, governance becomes argument and negotiation every time. When standards are clear, governance becomes fast because teams already know what good looks like. TOGAF 10 treats principles and standards as foundational because they allow consistent decisions across many teams without needing constant central control. Now that you have principles and standards, you need assurance, but you must do it in a way that builds trust. Architecture compliance is the practice of checking whether delivery aligns to the agreed architecture direction, standards, and constraints. The goal is not to punish teams. The goal is to catch misalignment early while it is cheap to fix. If compliance is framed as policing, teams will hide information. If compliance is framed as support, teams will engage early. TOGAF 10 encourages governance mechanisms that verify alignment while preserving delivery momentum. In real organizations, compliance works best when it is predictable, transparent, and focused on the few things that truly matter to enterprise risk and long-term sustainability. With compliance in place, you need an exception process because reality always has edge cases. Exceptions are not failures. They are conscious decisions to deviate from a standard due to timing, constraints, or specific business needs. Without a formal exception process, teams will bypass governance quietly and you will lose control of enterprise risk. With a clear exception process, you can allow flexibility while still maintaining accountability. An exception should record what standard is being deviated from, why, what risk is introduced, what compensating controls exist, and when the exception will be revisited. This keeps governance human and practical, and it prevents architecture from being seen as unrealistic. Now that exceptions are handled properly, you can see how governance directly controls cost. Many enterprise costs come from unmanaged complexity, duplicate platforms, inconsistent tooling, and fragmented integration patterns that increase operational burden. Governance controls cost by reducing duplication and enforcing reuse where it makes sense. It also controls cost by preventing expensive rework, such as rebuilding a solution to meet security or compliance requirements late in the program. Your governance system should make the cost of non-standard choices visible, so leaders can decide whether speed today is worth higher operating costs tomorrow. This makes architecture governance a financial discipline as much as a technical one. With cost control understood, you can appreciate how governance improves delivery predictability. Predictability improves when teams have clear guardrails, stable patterns, and early assurance that reduces late-stage surprises. Governance should shift risk discovery earlier, so delivery does not hit last-minute redesign due to missing operational readiness, missing security controls, or incompatible integration. When you design governance to be early, lightweight, and continuous, it stops being a hurdle at the end and becomes a support system along the way. This is how you protect delivery timelines while still ensuring enterprise alignment. Now that the governance outcomes are clear, picture a cloud platform program where multiple teams are building services on shared foundations. Without governance, each team chooses different identity approaches, different monitoring tools, and different security patterns, and the platform becomes unmanageable. With TOGAF 10 aligned governance, you establish enterprise guardrails, such as identity and access standards, baseline monitoring and logging expectations, and approved network and data handling patterns. You define decision rights so teams can innovate within boundaries while foundational choices remain consistent. You create a lightweight compliance approach that checks alignment early and supports teams with reference patterns. The result is faster delivery because teams are not reinventing the wheel, and lower risk because shared controls are built in from the beginning. With the example in mind, you need clarity on roles because governance collapses when responsibilities are vague. As the enterprise architect, you are accountable for defining architecture direction, principles, standards, and the governance mechanisms that assure alignment. Leaders are accountable for setting risk appetite, funding strategic platforms, and enforcing that teams participate in governance. Delivery teams are accountable for building within guardrails and raising exceptions transparently when constraints exist. When these responsibilities are explicit, governance becomes fair because everyone knows their role. This also improves organizational maturity because architecture is no longer a personal influence game, it is a defined operating model. Now that roles are clear, you should govern for outcomes, not activity. If you measure governance by number of reviews, you will create more reviews. If you measure governance by reduced incidents, reduced rework, reduced duplication, and faster time to decision, you will design governance that supports those results. You should also reward teams for early engagement and for using standard patterns because that reinforces the culture you want. Governance becomes sustainable when it is connected to meaningful performance indicators that matter to executives, such as operational stability, audit readiness, and delivery predictability. TOGAF 10 becomes more powerful when you link governance to measurable enterprise outcomes. With measurement in place, you must avoid traps that destroy trust. One trap is over-governing, where you review everything and become a bottleneck. Another trap is under-governing, where you have standards but no assurance, so drift becomes normal. A third trap is inconsistent enforcement, where some teams are held to standards and others are not, creating resentment. Another trap is unclear exception ownership, where exceptions are granted and never revisited, turning temporary deviations into permanent risk. You avoid these traps by keeping governance risk-based, transparent, and consistent, while designing a simple exception lifecycle. Now that you know what to avoid, you need a practical adoption strategy because governance is cultural as much as structural. You introduce governance by showing teams that it removes friction and prevents late surprises. You start with a small number of high-impact standards such as identity and access, data handling, and operational monitoring, and you provide clear reference patterns so compliance is easy. You communicate decision rights clearly so teams know what they can decide locally. You also make the exception process respectful and fast so teams do not feel trapped. When governance is introduced as enablement and clarity, it gains support. When it is introduced as control and paperwork, it fails. Let's now discuss the key takeaways from what you learned so far so you can apply it immediately. You learned that architecture governance in TOGAF 10 is a decision system that defines who decides, what standards apply, how compliance is assured, and how exceptions are handled transparently. You learned that governance should act as guardrails that enable speed, not speed bumps that slow teams down. You learned that clarity of decision rights reduces friction and prevents fragmentation. You learned that risk-based governance protects delivery flow by reviewing the right changes at the right depth. You learned that principles and standards prevent chaos by creating consistent expectations that teams can reuse. You learned that architecture compliance must build trust by catching misalignment early and focusing on what truly matters. You learned that exceptions are essential safety valves that preserve flexibility while maintaining accountability. Finally, you learned that governance controls cost and improves delivery predictability by preventing duplication, rework, and late stage surprises. Now that you understand how TOGAF 10 architecture governance helps you control risk, cost, and delivery without slowing teams, you are ready to design governance that people actually respect and use. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your architecture and delivery peers, and comment with the one governance rule or guardrail you believe would make the biggest positive difference in your organization right now.